welcome to the second episode of Homework Hotline, the show with all the helping hands on all your homework needs. I'm your host, Isaiah Gira, and we here at HMG News have teamed up with some special tutors to bring you this show. Each episode will be going over certain subjects for about 10 minutes each, and you guys can join live and ask questions at our Twitch at Hawk Media Group News. Meanwhile, our tutors will be working on sample problems based on the topics currently being worked on in your classes. So let's get right into it. We have some friendly, familiar tutors joining us, and we have our lovely behind-the-scenes workers. Let's begin by introducing our lovely tutors here with us. We have Sarah, Vincent, and Gracie. And with that out of the way, let's get right into the lesson, starting off with Sarah. We're going to start a timer. Sarah, there's a Jamboard access just for you in your lesson if you need to. And the floor is yours.
All right, thanks. So we're going to be going over parts of the brain and their functions, and this kind of connects to HBS too. So if you're a sophomore in biomed, this is definitely going to help. So we're just going to go straight over to the Jamboard. And right here we have our brain, and you can tell that I only have the functions labeled, and we're going to go over the individual parts that are like actually being seen here. So this area in the front right here is what we know as our frontal lobe, right? It actually extends back to this area here. And entire region is our frontal lobe. And this is the most superior part of our body. So it's going to be the most closest to the front, or because this is going to be your forehead area right here. So this is known as the frontal lobe. And the main parts of it are that it's responsible for judgment, emotion, language, meaning, and association. And that actually rolls into something that we're going over in psychology right now, and that's the Broca's area. The Broca's area is also in the frontal lobe. It's like around here somewhere, and it kind of deals with speech production, and that's like a main part that we've went over. And then a different part, though, that you might also know as the Wernicke's area, and you can really confuse them kind of easily. So this is like a very important part, I guess I would say. So the Wernicke's area is going to be in your temporal lobe, though, and that's not speech production. That's going to be speech understanding. So that's like writing and like listening. So that's going to like kind of, show you how to like listen to people. And then on the most, I guess you would say this is the most superior part of the brain, and your head, I guess. Oh yes, this would be the most anterior part. Sorry, I messed that up. So the frontal lobe is the most anterior part of your body, which is the front, and then your parietal lobe is your most superior part of your body, and that's this one that's dealing with touch. That's kind of what we know. You're not gonna have to go into depth about it for psychology, but for biomed, you might want to know like the two parts of it. There's gonna be like sensory and then motor, I think. And that's gonna be your parietal. And then the part of your brain that's most dorsal, or towards the back, is your occipital, and that's all about vision. Like, your occipital lobe is basically just going to take all of the information from your eyes and process that into what you see. And then on the side here, this is going to be a little interesting to outline, but on the side here we have our temporal lobe, and that's kind of just all hearing. It has memory processing too, but it's mostly just dealing with hearing and like understanding words. And so that's basically all that does. And then on the bottom here is another often like overlooked part, but it's still part of the brain, so you kind of have to know it. It deals with balance and coordination, and that's your cerebellum, right? It's spelled with a C, so coordination kind of makes sense with it. And our last part that we went over in class is the brain stem. So this is the most inferior part, and so that's the brain stem. And there's actually three parts that you kind of have to know. And there's the medulla oblongata, which is like kind of the most highest part, and then you have your pons, which is like this like whole arc here. And then the most inferior part, so that's the brainstem itself. And that connects itself to the actual spinal cord. And that's basically your entire brain. Like a key thing to remember are all of the little words that are like associated with it. So like movement and attention are all of the frontal lobe, touch and taste, those are the parietal, and then vision obviously for occipital. And this is another good question that may come up is what is the brain a part of? And there's two nervous systems that you should know. There's the central nervous system and then the peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system is like your brain and your spinal cord. That's all it is. It's just your brain and your spinal cord. And then your peripheral nervous system are all of the nerves that branch off of your spinal cord and like go into your limbs and things like that. So that's another like kind of key factor that we need to pay attention to. So long as you understand those, you should be able to like understand most of your tests because that's the entire thing. But other than that, I don't think there's anything else to go along with this. So yeah.
All right, so that was a fascinating lesson you had prepared for us, Sarah. We look forward, if there's any more psychology or if even you want to teach biomed in the future, we very much look forward to it here. Now we're going to go over complex numbers in Algebra 2 with our friend Vincent here. Thank you, Vincent. Go right ahead and start teaching.
All right, so we're going to be doing some basic operations with complex numbers. And to start real quick on this Jamboard, I want to go over what a complex number composes of, really. So the correct form, or the standard form for it, is a plus bi, where a is your real part, and bi is your imaginary part. So keep this in mind. It'll be helpful when we start combining the like terms. But I'm going to go ahead and throw up an example here. So let's get some multiplication of these two complex numbers here. Okay, so we have this multiplication 2 minus 6i times 7 minus 7i. So pretty simple here. We just start by FOILing. So remember, that starts with your first two terms, so which in this case would be 2 and 7. So we multiply those, we get 14. Your outer terms, which is your 2 and your negative 7i. You multiply that, negative 14i. Inner terms, negative 6i and positive 7. Multiply that, and that's where you get your minus 42i. And your last terms. Now here, whereas this is a bit different from other stuff like this with multiplication, you get negative 6i times negative 7i, which is 42, positive 42, I squared. Now, something to keep in mind, every time you see an I squared, keep in mind that I squared is equal to negative 1. So really what we're saying here is 42i squared. We're basically saying 42 times negative 1, which is negative 42. And so that's a pretty key note when it comes to complex numbers. And then we go ahead to finish this off, we just combine our like terms. So we'd have the 14, and remember this 42i squared becomes negative 42. So we combine that, 14 minus 42, negative 28, and then we combine our imaginary parts, negative 14i and negative 42i. So we combine that, and this is our answer. Okay, so now we're going to be going over something a little bit more complicated. Let's do some division. So let's start with this. 7 over 5i, or 7 plus 5i over 3i. Now, the way we solve this is we can't have this I in the denominator. We need to get rid of this. And we do this basically by multiplying the bottom, the denominator, times I, and the top times I. And you'll see why this gets rid of the I in a second. So let's start with the top. So we distribute the I to the 7 plus the 5i. So I times 7, 7i, plus I times 5i. which is 5i squared. Bottom, 3i times I, 3i squared. Same thing here. We see all these I squareds, which is -1. So we'll start at the top. 7i plus 5i squared is really 7i plus 5 times -1, which is -5. So 7i minus 5 over 3i squared, which is 3 times -1, which is -3. However, the form on the top here, 7i minus 5, is not correct. We have to have the real part come before the imaginary part. So we just switch the order around, turn it into -5 plus 7i, all over -3. And that's your answer for that one. Now, we have one more example here, and this is going to be the most complicated. Introducing a new, I guess, concept you could say, which is a conjugate, and I'll explain what that is. So let's get an example. So we have 6 plus 2i over 1 plus 2i. Now, we can't just multiply the bottom and the top by I, because we'd have to distribute that to the 1 also, which would just make that I, and that basically creates an endless cycle. So we have to do something a little bit different. And what we do is we multiply the bottom and the top by the conjugate. So what a conjugate is really is a complex number, and you just switch the sign of the imaginary part. So the conjugate of 1 plus 2i is just 1 minus 2i. So what we do is we multiply each side by that, or the top and the bottom, by 1 minus 2i. And it helps to just put parentheses around it. Now we have a bit more work to do. So let's set up our division sign there. Now we have to FOIL the top and FOIL the bottom. So when we FOIL the top, remember, first term comes first. 6 times 1, 6. Last terms, your 6, and your outer terms, your 6 and your -2i, which turns into -12i. Our inner terms, 2i and 1, so that's plus 2i. And our last terms, which is 2i and -2i. Multiply that, you get -4i squared. Now let's just leave that up there for now, and let's FOIL the bottom part. Our first terms, each are 1, so we multiply that together, it's just 1. Outer terms, 1 and -2i. Multiply that, just -2i. Inner terms, 2i and positive 1. Multiply that, and that's plus 2i. And our last terms, 2i and -2i again, which is -4i squared. Now, this is when we can start simplifying this. So let's get to the bottom, set up our division sign again. Simplify the top first. So we see an I squared in the top, -4i squared, which is -4 times -1, which is 4. So this really becomes a 4. Now we combine our real parts and our imaginary parts. Our real parts here are 6 and 4, which is 10. And our imaginary parts, -12i and a positive 2i. You combine that, -10i. So that takes care of the top. Now we have the bottom here, and this is where the conjugate comes in. So this I squared also turns into -1, which is -4 times -1, right? Which is just 4, same thing. So we combine our real parts. We have 5. And if you'll notice, our imaginary parts are -2i and positive 2i. Now this is what happens when you multiply by the conjugate. The imaginary parts cancel. And this is how you get rid of the I in the denominator. So -2i plus positive 2i is 0. So we just leave the 5 in the bottom. We're almost done here. We can simplify this. A thing to keep in mind is when you want to simplify something like this, you have to divide by the same number in all 3 parts. So this 10, this -10i, and the 5 all have to be divisible by a number. So in this case, we can do 5. So we start with the top left first. 10 divided by 5, 2. The -10i divided by 5 is a negative 2i. And obviously, the bottom is just 5 divided by 5, which is over 1, which is the same thing as 2 minus 2i. That's our answer here. That covers mostly of what I want to talk about. We went over conjugates, how to get that out of the denominator. It's a pretty important part. So being able to recognize that and multiply that out, FOIL out, and the i's cancel. And so, yeah, that's our answer. And that's all the points I wanted to make. With that being said, thank you for listening.
Thank you for coming on and teaching us, Vincent. You did an awesome job, and we seem to have some agreements in the comments. We have Miss Fisk. Shout out to Miss Fisk, who says, good job, Vincent. And also Kaylin from Raving for Retail, who's also watching this stream. So, Gracie, you have the Jamboard up, and go right ahead. We're going to start the 10-minute timer.
All right. Okay, so we're going to be going over vertical asymptotes, and as a preface, I'm going to put these two formulas, and they're very important to just keep in mind while we're working on asymptotes. So these are two basic equations that we'll be encompassing and going over when we're discussing vertical asymptotes. So let's go on to our first example. So our first example is going to be this formula. So it's going to be 2x minus 12 over x plus 2. So when we're discussing the vertical asymptote, all we need to truly focus on is this denominator down here. This is all we need to be looking at. So when we're looking for the vertical asymptote, what we do with that is we set this equal to 0. So you would rewrite it as x plus 2, set it equal to 0, and then your answer is going to be x equals negative 2. Pretty straightforward with that one. And now we're going to be going over a more difficult one. So I'm going to write it down right here. And our next problem is going to be negative 1 over x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now, the first step that you have to do when you see that your equation is kind of long is see if you can factor and simplify everything out. So as we can see, we can definitely factor this and make it more simpler. So I see that I can take out that all of these are factors of 3. So I'm going to simplify it out, and this is what we should get. So we should get x plus 3 and then x plus 3 again. And this can easily be simplified, and now our new problem would look like negative 1 over x plus 3 squared. And referring back to those original equations that I wrote down, it looks closer to this one right over here. So our next step now is going to be finding the vertical asymptote. So as you know, when you have to first set this equal to 0. And then our next step, of course, is to be getting rid of that square root symbol. So we're going to be squaring everything. And then we're left with x plus 3 equals to 0. And then we would set it equal, and our answer would be x negative 3 plus or minus, of course, because we included the square root right in the beginning. So this is, of course, our vertical asymptote, and how you would write this out, because it's two numbers, would be plus 3 and then minus 3. Okay, I'm going to erase some of this really quickly so we can do one more problem. And as I said, we're going to leave those two equations that I wrote on top because you should always be referring back to those whenever you're dealing with these problems. It's just more of a basic to have them up there. Our next problem is going to be, let me write this out. It's going to be 1 minus x squared over x squared minus 5x plus 6. Okay. So as I said before, when we have a long problem like this, we first have to simplify it and see what it can simplify to. And I'm just going to factor it out really quick. So we should get x minus 2 and then x minus 3. And we would set these both equal to 0. So x minus 2 equal to 0. You should get x equals 2. And then x minus 3 set equal to 0. We would get x equals 3. And one thing I would like to note is that if you're ever asked to find the domain of one of these type of problems, you would only focus on the denominator. So our domain for this would be as followed. I'm just going to indicate the domain by writing that D and then putting a colon. So for this, of course, we go from least to greatest number. So we would write negative infinity, comma, 2, and then there's a unity right here because you have to put all of this together. Unity, then our two numbers that we got here, our 2 and our 3, and then one more unity, and it would be 3, that's not right, 3 infinity. So always when you're going to be working with vertical asymptotes and domain, the big focus is that you have to just take in consideration this denominator, this bottom part. To basically wrap everything up when it comes to finding vertical asymptote is that whenever you have a long equation, you first have to factor everything out. It's going to be more difficult if you don't factor everything out because it's just going to be a longer process when you're setting this all equal to 0. And always remember, whenever you have a square root, that you have to take in consideration that it's going to be that plus or minus symbol. So you're going to have two vertical asymptotes there whenever you see that symbol. Yeah, that's pretty much the whole lesson to wrap everything up.
All right, thank you so much, Gracie, for that amazing lesson. And I believe that concludes today's episode of Homework Hotline. Now, remember, check us out on YouTube on Mondays. We stream here on Thursdays on Twitch, but our edited videos will air every Monday on YouTube at HMG News. Also, follow our Instagram at HawkMediaGroup.news and check out our link in the Instagram, which will take you to a form you can fill out if you wish to teach. Check us out next week, and if you guys have trouble with your homework, remember, you know who to call. It's the Homework Hotline.